is Shadi Jama, and it's my distinct pleasure to welcome you to the nation's Campaign Express Youth Forum, where our focus is on youth issues and perspectives in the context of the upcoming national election, which has been called for the 19th of January 2022. To help us frame today's discussion, I have with me Ms. Farhana Bulbilia, youth advocate, consultant, education ambassador, and project coordinator for You Report Barbados, a UNICEF youth engagement platform and communication tool designed to bridge the gap between young people and policy makers. I also have with me Mr. Alex Downs, youth activist, former journalist, and one of the young men behind the popular Kev's Politics platform. Thank you both for agreeing to help us break down what's happening on the ground among our island's youth. Farhana, the last time you were with us, you articulated very clearly some of the trends you've seen among young people as it relates to the issues in this election. And I want to pick up the discussion where we left off last time.
Thank you, Shadi, again for having me and continuing the discussion. I think it's a really critical and important discussion, especially as we see the parties begin to publish their youth manifestos. I know that young people will be looking to see where their priority areas are most reflected and how, the parties intend to carry forward what we want to see. Definitely through You Report and through the polls that we would have issued throughout last year, there was a lot of topics that I think struck with young people, most importantly. Of course, again, the issue of crime and violence amongst youth is always very high. How do we ensure that young people have viable ways to earn an income, to gain an education, and something that is meaningful for us? So that is always a very big issue that we like to talk about at You Report, and one in which we issued polls about as well. So what young people are saying is that when they go to, vote, whether, in this election or whether they're engaging in civic participation in other ways, their main priority is jobs, employment. How do I sustain myself beyond an education? You've equipped me, this country has equipped me with a good, solid education. But if I am having a background in technology and innovation, why don't I see the jobs to reflect that? Why is it that we continue to have a country that these jobs that are well paid are dominated by much older persons? And for young people to get even a foot through the door, why is it that just so hard? So I know that is one priority area that we want to see coming into this election period and going to the polls. What is the plan? What's the party's track record of creating those innovative jobs? But just how do they even speak about youth in the first place? How do they speak about youth as partners of development, not just recipients of handouts, but true partners that can carry forward the things that we want to see? So that's the first point that I wanted to make. It was around jobs and employment.
Thank you so much. I know, definitely, as I've said in other forums, when we did the research around the national youth policy, for example, economic opportunity was a recurring theme. No matter what the question was that we asked, the feedback from young people suggested that they were very, very concerned about economic opportunity and what would be facilitated for them, feeling very much as if they had been forgotten in many ways. So, Alex, I want to turn to you. I know that through the platforms and the different initiatives that you are involved in, you have access to perhaps a little bit more of a raw perspective than Farhana would get through her formal polls. So I'd like to hear from you in terms of what's the feedback, when you get your Twitter spaces, when you get your feedback from Kev Politics, what are young people saying? What's the word on the ground?
All right, so good morning, first of all, to Shadi and Farhana and everyone listening. Thanks for having me on the show, of course. And I'd like to first just echo the sentiments made by Farhana in the sense that what we see essentially is that young persons are really, really concerned with job security and quality of jobs. And that really has to do with economic enfranchisement. So, the whole discussion of your educational basis, you following the plan that's been put up for you, you go to university, you get your degree, and then what? What type of job are you going to have? Are you going to have a job? And then this relates then to the cost of living. And so, you can't get a job or a job that matches either your qualifications or your expectations or your reality. And then how do you manage in this world as a young professional, especially with the cost of living? And that's certainly, I think, one of the main, if not the key critical area that young persons are concerned about. And I think another one, especially in the context of our elections right now, is youth engagement. And so they always say, they only feel that politicians talk to me when it's elections. What about the other 4 years or whatever the case may be? I think that's a real concern, because what's happened, I think, is that you've had a cadre of young persons who are now, well-educated, some of them feeling as though they've been disenfranchised, they've been forgotten. And then so when they are engaged at this critical juncture in our democratic process, some of them are honestly not that interested in even having a discussion. So I think those are the things that we need to kind of like focus on and reshape within the country and the context, so that young persons, feel a bit more engaged and feel as though they have a say in citizenry, and then they feel as though they can go on and contribute further to society.
But how do we do that? We've seen some parties even issuing a youth manifesto. We've seen some parties having, certain youth forums and that kind of thing. And going back to this point of feeling like it's a sometime engagement, it's not necessarily genuine. How do young people want to be engaged? So, for example, some politicians might say that they come on the social platforms, particularly Twitter, and they try to engage with the young people and they get dragged, right? There's this very strong anti-establishment sentiment that's developing among young people. And you even hear them in the context of the election saying they're not voting, they're not happy with the current government, they're not, convinced that, the alternatives are any better, and their solution is to disengage. What would you say to them?
So I think the reality is, and it may be an uncomfortable one for some of us, but the reality is that we've all experienced at some stage of our life, you will be dragged. That's the reality, that's the nature of the job. Not saying that you should be dragging persons just for the point of it, not saying that you should be rude and kind. But the reality is that, especially in public life, sometimes you will make mistakes. And when you make mistakes, persons will let you know. They should let you know. That's part of the democratic process. Now, that being said, at the same time, I think what really needs to happen is for us as young people to understand that this is a conversation. And so, the question you always ask, and, it takes two hands to shake. So for us to want to be engaged, we have to be willing to be engaged. We have to be willing to listen. We have to be willing to share our feedback. At the same time, I think those in public life need to understand that young people, we're not just a once every 5 years or once an administration group of young people. Like, the discussion I actually have with young people is we're not going to be young forever. There's going to come a point where we transition into, being middle-aged adults, where that seems to be the quote unquote time that persons are interested in engaging us, because we have more of a stake. And so how you engage with us, that shapes the future, and that then shapes the present for a political party. And so that level of engagement has to be consistent, whether that means having, persons that are dedicated to engaging and understanding what our issues are, and understanding how they can then find solutions to those issues. Or even if there's a situation where they're not, readily available solutions, they're not easy solutions, having that discussion with us and saying, look, this is the reality that we currently face. We're going to work with you through this time, but we need you to bear with us. I had a discussion with someone, and they were saying that Barbadians, and I guess young people in particular, we're not necessarily a group that focuses on fairness. We kind of focus on unfairness. So we try to make sure that no one is unfair, that no one is disenfranchised, etc. And I think, like, as a group of, young Barbadians, the key thing that needs to happen, for me, I would love to see it, is some form of consistent engagement where either government can have what they're doing be reported, so we can, always check on it, instead of at the 5-year mark being like, oh, I didn't know that happened. And on the flip side, I would love government to be able to come to us and sometimes hold their hands up and say, look, you know what, you have a point. We're going to listen to you. We're going to work with you, as opposed to sometimes taking that far approach where it seems as though everything is perfect and we just keep it noise until we young people. So I think that's probably the main thing in terms of engagement that I would look for, and I think many young people look for.
But let me say devil's advocate, because the devil don't need no help. But I want to present another view, which is, we've seen quite a few times with this current administration that a decision is taken, it's communicated, there's backlash, and then the decision is walked back. The policy is walked back and a different approach is taken, or they go back to the drawing board. And they've received a lot of criticism for that kind of thing, where it comes across as though they're wishy-washy. You know, from some people's perspective, they're listening, they're willing to engage, they're going above and beyond to make sure that they respond to criticisms in real time. And it's not just my way or the highway, but then you hear this narrative of a dictatorship. So my question to you, both of you, you know, where's the right balance, right? You know, because arguably this government, more than most others, have demonstrated a willingness to say, you know, okay, maybe that wasn't the best idea. I hear you. Let me take a different approach. But they've gotten criticism for that, you know, the kind of sentiment that says, you know, you measure twice and cut once, right? So what do you think the next government, whoever may compose that next government, need to do to strike a better balance?
So like you said, Shadi, and I'm always someone, I like the phrase, I wish you could get on a shirt, give Jack his jacket. I always believe that. So when you do good, you get praised. When you do wrong or you make mistakes, you let them know. So, you know, in this instance, as you said, we've seen government sometimes make decisions, policies, etc., and based on feedback or based on reports, they know that, okay, look, you know, maybe we have to take a second and look at what's happening here. And I commend them for that because, you know, it's one thing to say that you aren't engaged as a country sometimes or decisions are made unilaterally. But if it is, you do have a critical concern, the government is willing to listen to that. I think they should be praised. Now, I think for the next administration, and if I'm speaking specifically with young people, I think, you know, we always talk about youth engagement and what does it really mean? And all these type of discussions we have at a youth level. But I think what really needs to happen is that there needs to be, again, a dedicated understanding that young people are to be engaged throughout the process. That the democratic process doesn't culminate with elections. Elections is a part of the process. And so if we're talking about a process and not an event, it needs to be something that lasts over the span of the administration so that young people, as they go, whether from, you know, primary, secondary level, tertiary level, going through university, they feel as though they have a say in certain things. So like, for example, like, I may be a little bit past my undergrad years at uni, but, you know, hearing some of the young persons, especially in social media, speak about how their experience has been, what are some of the things that they think could have helped with that? The Give Back program, you know, they're saying it's good, but, you know, we feel as though certain ideas would make it better. And if they can have that ability to share those thoughts and see those thoughts responded to, not saying that every suggestion will be taken on board, but if it can be considered, I think you can start to see young people feel a bit better about A, the society they live in, B, the democratic process, and then ultimately we're going to have discussions like we've had over the last few days about, I don't really feel like voting, you know, it can make a difference. I think those things will really start to help and, you know, maybe the best interest of both the government, executive, and the people of the country.
Thanks so much, Alex. Farhana, I know you want to jump in here.
Yeah, I think one thing that the people need to know, and especially people vying for office, is that young people know how to sniff out tokenism versus true inclusion. And that is what we've seen time and time again, right? And with that said, what does youth engagement really look like? And as Alex alluded to, these are questions that we asked ourselves. Is it simply putting a young candidate on a podium and saying, this is our youth representative? Or does it go beyond that? Is it simply putting out a youth manifesto? What does that look like? And I think continuous engagement looks like different things, right? It's one, ensuring that the ministries that you operate are fully sensitized to the issues on the ground for young people, elevating qualified, suitable young people to positions where they can lead on programs and projects that impact young people. Those are some of the ways that we continue to have that conversation. But similarly, it's weeding out those ideas and those problematic ideas around youth. Are youth simply recipients or are we partners? And I can say that I haven't truly seen that within how we operate as government. Do we see young people as partners? And if we see that, then certain things will fall into place. We wouldn't have to be questioning or asking or begging for certain things, but it would simply come about, right? So I think that idea around how young people are viewed, young people understand that. And we, from the moment we sit down in a meeting or see a post on social media, we know whether this person really understands or not. And we're good at that sort of critical thinking. So when candidates beg the argument, we're on social media, we're engaging with youth, but what are you saying? What are the issues that you're touching on? Are you speaking it and about it in a way that we understand, or are you speaking above our heads? So that's some thoughts for consideration as well.
And the last time we spoke, Farhana, you made the point that young people are not a homogeneous group. And when they go to the polls, priorities are different across different age groups within, the voting demographic that's considered young. And I'd like to invite you to expand on that a little bit more. If there's a candidate that's listening, if there's a political party whose ear is to the ground and they come across this discussion, what do you want them to know about the fact that young people are not homogeneous?
Yeah, so that's a big question. So the first, I think, is simply where that young person is in their voting history. So are they voting for the first time? Are you engaging with a first-time voter? Are you engaging with someone who has voted many times? What we've seen through your report is first-time voters, they come with the perspective that what is happening right now, what would have happened in the short term, what within the last year, within the last 2 years leading up to this election, right? They really engage with the candidate and are oftentimes very inclined towards the candidate that perhaps their persons within their household are voting for. They're more inclined towards that. Mm-hmm. Second, third, fourth-time voters, right? They are still within that youth age range, under the age of 30. And sorry for anybody who may be listening and over that age, you're still young. They have a history. They understand what the party before that in power may have done. They understand what the party would have done over a longer time frame. So they've built that history. And what we're seeing is that accountability, right? We know what you pledged to us before. Where have you achieved that and where have you not? And that history comes into play. And then some of the young persons who are less inclined, we're saying, I don't know if I want to go to the polls. That history is more fresh in their mind, right? They've become disillusioned with it because they have that checklist. They know what the checklist was before. They know what hasn't been achieved. They see what is being promised again. And there are concerns there that where is the accountability? How are you achieving the things that you've set out to achieve? But then what are the options? If there's no better options for me, I'm going to stay away from the polls. And that's what we're seeing. And that's what one perspective. I think the second perspective that I think for me as a young Muslim woman that I have to bring is that minority and marginalized groups often have certain experiences that we use to gauge how we engage with candidates. Are we being included? Are we being discriminated against? In what ways are the candidates sensitive to the different cultures and religious traditions? And how do they articulate that to us, right? And that's what is important for some groups, and especially for me, additionally. So that in itself shows that young people are not homogeneous. And then there are a number of other factors which I think looks into, there are certain policies on varying issues like use of marijuana, LGBTQI rights, women's rights and inclusion, and the list goes on.
All right. So I'm glad you went down that road in terms of, minority rights, and you identified some of the challenges that we have. I know that during the consultation period on the National Youth Policy, what we saw was that there were a lot of young people, marginalized groups of young people who really felt like their voice was not being heard and they were not accommodated, whether it was the LGBTQIA community, whether it was youth with disabilities, religious minorities, that kind of thing. And I think generally speaking, young people have demonstrated a willingness to be inclusive and almost an indifference to some of the things that are really problematic for some older generations. And I say that fully appreciative that there are young people that do hold some more conservative ideals. And we want to be careful not to perpetuate this narrative that all young people are liberal and progressive and, kumbaya demographic, right? So we appreciate that, in much the same way that young people are not a homogeneous group, that there are some that do hold some of these more traditional ideals. And my question to you is, how do you suggest that we reconcile that? We have, for example, this promise or this suggestion that there's certain things that should be put to the public via referendum, whether that is the legalization of marijuana or, the legitimization of same-sex marriages. There are certain fundamental issues that are arguably human rights issues that are being proposed to be put to the public, where you will have a situation where majority sentiment may be determinative of minority rights. And I'd love to hear more from you both on this type of issue and what you see on the ground from young people around this thing. We can start with you, Alex.
No worries. Shadi, I'm glad you framed this as a human rights discussion, because in reality, this is what it is. And, this is just my personal opinion, but when it comes to the discussion of referendum, sometimes I think that my view, I see it more as a tool that really should not be used as often. We have a government that has been elected by the people of the country. We can discuss the flaws, the pros with our current democratic system. But when you take human rights issues and you put them to be really what is a populist vote, what does the majority believe? That takes away the whole discussion of right or wrong and moves it more towards I like it or don't like it. So when we talk about things like LGBTQIA community, when we talk about things, it's not for referendum, but this is another discussion, human rights, mandatory death penalties, what we do with that. There's certain things that I believe have to be framed in the context of human rights. So it moves away from, do you think we should or we shouldn't? So, when we have that discussion, that's one thing to consider. I think as young people, and this is a point I wanted to raise while you were speaking as well. I think for most of us, we know our differences, and it's something I say all the time. We all know we have biases. That's not a lie. It shouldn't be a secret. We know we have biases, but those biases should not impact how we are and how we treat people. And so, for example, I think we kind of focus more on the things that bind us together as opposed to the things that break us apart. So we know we got biases. Like, I can put it as a football term. I like football. Football's my life, really, sometimes. I may be an Arsenal fan, and I know somebody else is a Manchester United fan. We could be mortal enemies when we play each other. But the reality is we got some understandings that football, certain issues in football, we need to come together to kind of get through, and there's absolutely no issue with that. So I try to take that approach when I'm looking at, whether governance, civic engagement, et cetera, critical issues. I think for a lot of people, that's where we are. So whether you identify as religious, whether you identify as, non-religious, you have no say, you don't care. I think the critical issues, the economy, jobs, cost of living. So, for example, not to get too political, but when you hear candidates get on stage and go down this line of misogyny and homophobia, you will realize that, and this is what I've seen, a lot of young people are like, what does that even matter? Like, nobody will care about that. Like, bro, we got actual issues that we're trying to fix. What you're telling me about things that don't matter is 2022, dog. So that's the kind of rhetoric I hear. And like you said, I know that's not homogeneous. I know it's not every single young person is going to feel this way. But from what I see, majority of young people are moving to a direction where those things that are human rights issues, they understand, they sympathize, they want to be allies. And the things that, such as that don't matter, when some older generations who may beg to differ start with that rhetoric, they kind of come back with like, yeah, we're not interested in that. We got actual issues to deal with. So,
yeah, I think for me, the idea of referendums is very concerning, because it is through, these ways of getting the public to zone in on specific policies that certain things are peeled back. So as a Muslim woman, I have seen these type of things in other countries happen, and then Muslim women cannot wear a hijab, which is what I have on my head. And that affects their ability to get education, medical care, all these different types of issues. And I can't remove myself from that, right? Similarly, putting myself back here in the place of Barbados and working within communities, you see how the day-to-day lives of people are affected through discrimination. And to put something like that to the public, something that is fundamental human rights, that affects someone's quality of life, their access to services, their access to jobs, their access to food, right? This is what it boils down to. And that's what the regular person, the average person on the streets needs to understand. When we go and vote for something that, we see as just a feeling, as a something that we uphold and want to uphold for ourselves, but don't think about the other person, right? What then happens is that affects that person's quality of life, their mental health, their state. And we have people existing within our society that cannot get the things that we need to thrive and prosper and survive. And that's essentially what it is. We're oppressing while we seek to elevate our own ideas. But more importantly, I think young people have raised a level of consciousness around these type of issues and the historical roots of these type of issues, which begs the question of, as we continue to progress as a society and as we now have become a republic and we move away from these old colonial mindsets, these type of issues will become more important, not necessarily on a political platform, but more so in hard policy. We want to see policy and legislative reform. That is it, full stop.
Thank you so much.
If I could just quickly add to Shadi as well, because Farhana was raising a really good point that I do feel strongly about as well. So, we sometimes have these discussions. I'm going to say we, whether it be young persons, whether it be older folk, we have these discussions and we kind of frame them around certain key pillars. And the reality is that, as Farhana said, young people are so much more, engaged and so much more aware of so many different issues. So whether it be environmental matters, talking about, marine life, you're talking about mangroves. I've had discussions with young people and sometimes they have concerns as to the direction the world in Barbados is going, that I myself as a young person, I was not aware of that. And so there's a whole range of different topics that I think, especially for leaders in the political arena, they have to be aware of if they're going to engage young people. And so you can present me a document stating that you're going to do all these wonderful things. And then a young person might literally ask you, what about the Greyhound Nature Sanctuary? Just as an example. And suddenly, you have to try to think, okay, well, I didn't necessarily think about that young people will be interested in, but there's so many different things. And I think if we're really going to be looking at it, we have to look at not just young people, but look at what are critical issues globally in the world. We've asked our young people to be global citizens. We've asked them to be well-educated. They've done that. And so now that they're well-educated, you have to be able to meet them at a place that they're willing to engage and understand. So that was just my one point.
Oh, no, thank you. That point is very, very well made. And I think that what I'm hearing is ultimately young people want politics in Barbados to be elevated, elevated beyond, the kind of gutter politics. We don't care about the personal business, for example, of our candidates. We care about where they stand on issues. And I know we've touched on education, we've touched on unemployment, we've touched on crime, but I want to zero in as well on the creative industries, entertainment, entrepreneurship, some of those issues that all tie back to economic opportunities. But we see that a lot of young people are much more willing to trod a non-traditional path, going to non-traditional professions and income earning opportunities. That gone are the days where, the only options are, lawyer, doctor, back manager type of situation. We have influencers and other creatives that are making so much more money. Young people seem to be a lot more focused on having a better work-life balance, enjoying experiences more so than, being on the grind and chasing after just $1. And I think that that's an important difference that we are seeing emerging. And I guess my question to you is, what else can we do to, in your view, capitalize on this as a nation, as individuals? What are some of the things that we should be asking for, or demanding, expecting of our representatives? Don't all rush at once. Farhana, do you wanna take that one?
Yeah, Shade, I'll attempt to take it on. So I think first I would like to establish that, for me, I am not within that creative sector. So I give my hand to those who have spoken about it. And I would like to refer to a colleague of mine, Cindy Celeste, who is a poet, and she's spoken profusely on the need to expand our cultural industries, give platforms to local creatives. And a lot of my knowledge around this has come from her. So I want to give Cindy her hat first. But more importantly, it's about investment. And in our conversations, it's always about investment. We have to invest to see the returns. And it's not just investing in a tourism product of what creativity looks like, but it's about expanding our mind to the self exchange that can take place between our country and, for example, the Africa region, around the exchange of creative knowledge, creative power, and so on. And not just that, but our market for how we get our products out there. So within Barbados, we've seen a lot of traditional products over the years. Yesterday, I was in a conversation around, how do we elevate those creative products that we're producing? And one of the ways is, for example, that we don't think about is fisheries, right? Pairing agriculture and creativity with fisheries. And for example, Barbados is a fish producing nation, right? And we throw away a lot of that waste from skinning fish, from fish scales and so on. But that product can be used to generate products like handbags, leather, fish leather. And these are things that we don't think about. But who is willing to invest in these things? We have the byproducts. This is waste that is going into our landfills, into our waters. How then do we harness that? So young people are seeing these opportunities through social media, through other innovators that we're connecting with globally. But then when we come back to Barbados, the infrastructure is just not there. And that's just one example of many examples of just how we want to see those innovative and creative products move to the next level based on what we have here available to us.
Thanks for that, Farhana. Alex, do you have anything to add?
I think what they really just want is sometimes a listening ear. And so a perfect example of that, we were having a space on Twitter the other night, and one of the creators raised some concerns or frustrations really about the current drone ban. And he was saying, as young people, it's so difficult. You're trying to make your product international. You're trying to be the best in terms of quality, ideas. And they've been lobbying, trying to get some feedback on the drone ban and why is it banned? Can they have a situation where they can work with government to ensure there's still security, but then they can exploit their creative freedoms? And so, they have the ideas, and sometimes all they're asking for is just a little engagement to share the ideas, get some feedback, see how maybe they can make it better. It's the same thing we do all the time with stakeholder engagement. You engage stakeholders, you present maybe an idea, you get feedback from them on an idea, you go back to the drawing board, you come back, you have discussions. I think that's what they're asking for. And then secondly, for creatives, I think, and this is more generally, so it's not specific to just them, I think what they really want to see is government be about it. So, we all know the direction that the world is heading, digital enfranchisement. Digital, opens doors to the entire world. So no longer are you just focused on Barbados, but you can now take your Barbadian talents and expose them to the world. And so that requires a few things, right? That requires you to have the kind of economic framework that can make sense. So whether it be digital payments, whether that be allowing you to have your product and, because you can export it to the world now, you can have digital payments, That means that you're no longer just a citizen of Barbados, but you're a citizen of the world. And that goes for artists, that goes for musicians. I think another thing then that has to come into the discussion about digital framework and how we build it out may seem very simple, but for young people, if it is that I do not have the economic means to sort of the banking system, I don't have the digital framework, so even something like PayPal becomes kind of hard to even get into. How do we then create the platform for young people to work, both in Barbados, we talk about job creation, this is again general, but how do we create that platform for young people to work in Barbados? It'd be an issue, but then we don't create a platform to work globally, and that still be an issue. So I think for creatives, those are, maybe two of the things are off the top of my head, having interacted with them on a daily basis on Twitter, on social media, we've seen needs to be engagement, and you need to be about it, because creatives are not just an afterthought. Creatives literally drive it. Ashade, I'll say this. We recognize that creatives are so important in our personal lives. Every single day, I can tell you people either listen to music, they watch movies, they talk about shows on Netflix. That probably dominates the memes that go around, the election jingles that you tap your foot to. That's when we know that creatives are important, right? So creatives are important throughout. And if it is that you want young people to be entrepreneurs, be creatives, then you have to create a framework for them to do so and do it well as actual means of living, as opposed to just a hobby that you have. So,
very well said. I think ultimately what I am taking away from this discussion is that there's no simple solution. There's no one size fits all for responding to some of the youth concerns in these areas. And that ultimately we are at a place where economic enfranchisement, the creation of opportunities, the facilitation of business and different types of business, traditional and non-traditional, is of the utmost importance. So just to wrap up the discussion, I would ask you to share any parting words on this issue in terms of youth issues, as well as perspectives with respect to the upcoming election. Any parting words, Farhana?
I think just to reinforce, to listen to young people, to see us as partners and not recipients of handouts, and that we are critical in the way that we think and the way that we do things. So engage with us on that level. We no longer want the party politics that is dirty and, as Shade said, in the gutter. We want critically minded people who come with real feasible solutions on the issues that we most care about. And that's what we want to see.
Alex, final word from you.
Sure, thank you again. Thanks for that, Farhana. She really put everything into, made it very succinct and impactful. But my contribution, I'll say this. I think for young people, we, as young as we are quite literally tired of games. This is not time for games. Like globally, nationally, this is not time for games. All we want is for credible people with tangible ideas to engage us. We're not going to have all the solutions. We're not going to get it right every time. We will make mistakes. That's just the nature of it sometimes. But we are serious about it. And if you take us seriously, I think what you will see is that this whole discussion we've had over the last couple of years about worrying if the youth vote is really going to matter or not, those are realities because the youth have not been engaged in a way that allows them to feel as though they have actual say. And so they become disenfranchised. Because the fear that I have is that when you disenfranchise the youth, they're not going to be youth forever. And if you create a situation where as youth, they feel as though it doesn't make a difference as they get older, as they too have children, and those children have children, you see a situation where no longer do you pass on certain ideals where my grandmother would say to me, I always voted for this party because I know what they've done in my community. You have a situation where you say, well, I never really voted because it don't really make a difference. And I don't want that as a reality for Barbados in terms of how we operate democracy. So that would be my contribution.
Thank you both so much. Thank you all for joining us. As I mentioned, my name is Shadi Jamet, and it has been my pleasure to host this nation's Campaign Express Youth Forum with Ms. Farhana Bubilia and Mr. Alex Down. Young people are clearly paying attention and intend to have their voice heard in this election. So we're continuing to create a forum that allows them to communicate and articulate their concerns as we inch ever closer to the election. And we hope to keep the conversation going even beyond the election. Thank you so much for joining us, and watch this space for more episodes.